Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar, Applied Lessons from Product Security Teams and Vulnerability Management. This webinar is part of our ongoing effort to help lead and educate cybersecurity practitioners and leaders in vulnerability management. My name is Patrick Garrity, security researcher and VP of marketing here at Nucleus, and I'm looking forward to hosting today's discussion. You can access and connect with me on LinkedIn. Best way to get a hold of me, Patrick M. Garrity. Today's panelists will touch on their expertise in relation to product security and vulnerability management. We have about an hour, and my goal is to make this session valuable for enterprise vulnerability management and security teams. I'll need some help, so please submit questions, comments in the chat. Feel free to add some emojis in there right now if you want, and during the session for feedback to make sure you can hear us and everything's a go. So, please, I'd love to hear also what are your biggest challenges as it relates to product security or working with product security teams if you're in vuln management. Joining me today are a group of great people. So thank you for joining today, Scott and Matt. First up, Scott Kuffer, co-founder and COO at Nucleus Security, currently backpacking somewhere in the world and had to hike to be on this webinar. So how are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Always happy to take time out of hiking beautiful countryside to deliver some product security news and opinions.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thanks for joining. And then we have Matt Clapham, Senior Director at Product Security Trust Center at newly acquired Microsoft Activision Blizzard. And Matt has also worked in product security previously for Microsoft, GE Healthcare, and then Johnson Controls. So, congrats on the new gig, I guess, being acquired by Microsoft.
Yeah, it doesn't change anything until it will.
Awesome. And you can connect with Matt Clapham on LinkedIn as well. So thanks for joining today, Matt. We're excited to chat product security with you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I think just getting started, and I'm gonna get off my my slides. I probably missed a few there, but Matt, you have an interesting background. You're working today with a gaming company, but I think there's some other experience you have that's a more recent thing, right? So I think it's important for people to understand, tell us a little bit about your background in product security.
Sure. So I kind of got my start in product security back with the Trustworthy Computing Initiative, back when they really said, okay, we need to do a better job of product security overall. I was in the Windows division at the time, and we really kind of that was the security champion, I guess you could call it, sort of, for the product team I worked on at the time. It really kind of started to teach me about it. From there, I spent some time in IT security. I've done other stuff in terms of working with games. I've worked in product security, and since about 2010, been building or operating or improving product security teams. So I've done that at several companies now. I helped build the product security team at GE Healthcare, and now I'm helping to build that over at Activision Blizzard.
Awesome, that's great. So help us understand, right? I talked to lots of vulnerability management teams, right, and product security teams both, and I think for everyone, some people might not fully understand what the role of product security is. Can you give us a quick overview as far as what you see as product security teams' core responsibility?
Sure. The way I like to describe it is we help make products more secure. And so you kind of think about that, assisting the product team, the development team actually making the thing, to consider security at every phase of the design. So from the first idea, first concepts, through to the implementation that actually gets delivered in some tangible form, whether it be actual software packages someone might install or a software as a service offering. Really helping them through that process, from thinking about things like threat modeling, helping them look and use tools and the findings from things like static code analysis, all those different things that we have sort of identified as helping an overall picture to build and design and ultimately deploy a secure product.
Hey Scott, you also work on product security with our product team, but also I think you have an interesting dynamic of talking to a lot of a lot of different organizations and teams. Is there anything you want to add from like a product security responsibility perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a wholehearted agreement with what Matt has described, but I think the one thing that always is implicit, but I just always like to bring to the surface is that I view security, especially product security, as a supporting function. Like our job in security is to support the product teams into making something happen, right? And so when we're thinking about vulnerability management or product security, like we're as much as we don't want to be, we are in the way of their goals, right? Their goal is to go build a thing, and we are slowing them down. And so it is our job to support them in building as fast as they can, while at the same time we are effectively we want to be the trusted advisors that they want to come to help them make decisions. And so I view it as always like we're like that guy in the back, the back bencher in like the federal government, right? So I come from the federal government, but there's the people out there making decisions, and then there's the people that they rely on to make better decisions. Because ultimately we can try to mandate things, but unless we get buy-in, unless we get the teams that we're working with to buy into it and actually work on it, we're not going to get anywhere. So that's the only other piece that I think is really important, as our job is support.
Hey, in regards to product security, and then you have vulnerability management, very often that's two different disciplines or different teams. Sometimes, occasionally, you have them integrated in one. But I think of Chris Hughes's picture of like the vuln management team just throwing vulns over the fence to product security. So I often hear the concept of like product security and vulnerability management teams butting heads. And I'm curious to hear from both of you, like, what are some of the challenges between vulnerability management and product security?
One of the biggest differences I've seen there is when you think of it as what their goals are for the individual teams and who their target audience is for the particular deliverable, right? That's where I've seen the biggest difference is, my target audience for the things, the problems, the security issues, if you will, that my team might find with our tooling or that we might identify in their product and try to help them fix are the development teams, the engineers that are actually building the code. Vulnerability management in some fashion or in some areas, some ways, from my experience, is looking more at the patches for stuff that's already out there and needs to get, patching in the infrastructure and whatnot. So given that that distinction there, sometimes it creates some tension or some challenges.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was going to say, do you have all day? We can talk about the challenge well, for forever, but I think ultimately what it comes down to is that you have two very different processes that are effectively organizations are trying to standardize into a larger thing, right? And that larger thing is the risk picture or the risk profile or the whatever you want to call it, right? It's your risk process. And then you have over here on the one side, you've got your corporate IT, whose job it is to support like knowledge workers and people that are delivering value to the organization. And then when you have product security, their job is to support basically the products that are out there making you more money, right? So it's like you're delivering different things, but you're trying to do the same outcome, right? And so what ends up happening is that you historically have these old school patch cycles where it's like, hey, once a month we're just going to do patches or we're going to roll out agents. But like that just doesn't work for product security, right? If it's like, hey, let's just go install agents in our code. I don't know if I've ever heard of that, and I would be very skeptical if I did. So I think the big problem is that you have just a fundamental difference of understanding of what the outcomes that you're looking for are, right? And historically, I see vulnerability management people come from a corporate background, like corporate IT background, and then product security comes from like an engineering and development background. And so they have a hard time seeing eye to eye. And then when you add in the different incentives and the different things that they're responsible for and the different audiences, it becomes very challenging very quickly.
In relation to, so people understand, maybe you're on the vuln management side, what are some of the common challenges of product security in the product security teams?
A lot of the challenges I've seen are related to when the problem is found versus where they are in the cycle. That can certainly create some issues in terms of, hey, when does it actually get fixed or addressed? Another thing is I've seen some of the same design failures or patterns of failure repeatedly over the years.
Yeah, I think timing is a really, really distinct, important piece here, right? Because like I don't know how many of y'all have gotten to the point where, especially I'm gonna talk about like some older development processes, but like have you ever gotten to the point where your three teams all put together their code, they shipped it, they compiled it, and then you threw it through something like a check marks, and then like a high severity vulnerability is shown up in check marks, and you have to make the decision. You're like, oh, we're like a day out from the release date. We know that this works. If we fix this, we'd have to go through testing again. We have to go through all these things again, and it becomes really expensive to fix that vulnerability. And so, what's the incentive for the team there, right? And so, timing and where you're at in the cycle is definitely a huge problem. I would also say that there's product security struggles with the fact that there are like we're agile, right? Or everybody's trying to be agile. And the reality is that security is really difficult to be agile with, right? Because you have a lot of work that is like there's a lot of work, whether it's through a scanning tool, whether it's through manual QA, whether it's through some other process to essentially audit what's happening, right? And so every time you want to make a change, it's exponentially difficult. It's honestly more work on a lot of cases to do the security for the change that you're going to make than the actual change itself, right? Like that the good old one-line change that causes a SQL injection, right? And it's important, but it's brings up some very unique challenges that only apply to product security, not vulnerability management. But I don't know, Matt, you have
And
more,
on that,
so like you
on,
probably
on,
I'm
on
a
the, well, I think on that note, right? Like one of my favorite topics is vulnerability prioritization, right? And it seems like that's one of the things that like vulnerability management teams need to consider here is like how how you should prioritize product security vulnerabilities is likely maybe vastly different than your traditional IT environment. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, absolutely. I actually try to stay away from prioritization. Similar to what Scott was saying earlier about, it's really about what the dev team, the product team is putting together. They are ultimately the keeper of what gets fixed when, and I can only suggest and say, hey, this looks really bad. You might want to put it at the front of the queue.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one. I've thought for years about this, and I've wanted to write something down, but it's one of those ones where once you put words down, people hold you to them. But the thing that's really fun about this individual problem, but also makes it really tricky, is that you have this situation where it's like it's really hard to tell like how to prioritize vulnerabilities, right? Because you've got like if you look at traditional IT security, you have the CVSS score, and it's not great, but it gives you a pretty decent idea of severity. But like the reality is, like I would say the severity rating system inside of product security vulnerabilities is just so hard to tell. It's so much more asset specific and like specific on the packages you're using. Like you don't even necessarily know if that line of the library is being used and until somebody goes and looks at it. And so it's just so much more manually taxing to actually verify findings inside of product security. And there's like two areas, right? There's the needle in the haystack, and you have to have a process for the needle in the haystack, but you also have to have a process for what I call just run of the mill regular patching vulnerabilities. And I think patching is like regular fixing, right? And so those are two very different processes, but you have to support both simultaneously because run of the mill vulnerabilities become needles in the haystack over time, and they become more and more expensive to fix over time, right? This is the other thing that's so challenging is that, hey, I can drop everything and fix a vulnerability like Log4j, but like how much money did we all spend to fix Log4j versus if we had known about it 6 months ahead of time while like it was in the development process, you had 6 months to fix it. It's so much more efficient to fix vulnerabilities. And so you have this trade-off between like effective fixing and then also like efficiency of fixing. And you have to figure out that balance. And so it's very individual to an organization, I would I would say.
Yeah, very individual to the individual product team. They may have things like hard marketing deadlines. They've already bought all the marketing collateral for a certain delivery date or a certain conference or whatever, and they can't move that date. So coming in with a big problem late in the game becomes hey, how bad is it compared to slipping the date? Kind of a challenge. And I don't want to make that decision for them. That's a decision they need to make.
Yeah, totally
Hey,
agree.
so how do you enable then, these situations? Because it's like it's very easy for a company or a team to say, hey, fix every vulnerability that's exploited within our environment or has a high CVSS score, right? Like how do you solve for that problem or challenge? Where people want to maybe get alignment and mandate uh uh when and how things get fixed.
Well, I'm curious how Matt deals with that at Activision. I feel like I've never worked in an organization, but I feel like that's like, I don't know, gamers are some of the most demanding folks when it comes to tech that I know. So I'm curious how you guys handle that.
Well, I unfortunately I can't tell you about my current job, but I can tell you from the perspective of a longtime person in this space.
That
Um, uh, the Yes, certain industries can be demanding, and the challenges there are probably the same across all of them. Because, as I like to say, outside of the joysticks or the big X-ray guns or the giant magnets, it's all software. So all of the challenges that we see in computer software that's running on a desktop versus running on a large medical device versus running on a small medical device versus running on a building management system. Yeah, it's all software. It all has those same problems and they all need to be addressed with that same kind of thing in mind. Hey, how do we make it more secure for all the customers? What's the most logical way to prioritize fixing this particular thing at this particular time?
I think that's well said. If I add anything, it'll just erode, the nicely thought out thing that Matt just said. So I'm just gonna hear on that one. And you're on mute, Patrick.
Yeah, we can hear you.
But I'm sure what you were saying was the best thing you'll say all day.
It was just working on the technical things. Sorry, as I'm hosting. So I think taking this a step further, right, is you have a lot of vulnerability management teams that are responsible for product security, or they feel like they're responsible for product security. So like, what would be your best advice for those people that are tied to product security but maybe don't know the intricacies in relation to development life cycles and product security in general?
Learn it.
Yeah.
And that
100%.
could be, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no. Okay. So I always like to tell people, like, I'm a big proponent of vulnerability management having to learn how other parts of the system work, right? Like vulnerability management, like the reason they feel responsible is because a lot of times they are responsible or they get yelled at just as much as product security, right? And even though if they're different teams, you just get into this pointing match oftentimes, like that old Spider-Man meme that was going around for a long time. But the thing that I always am a big proponent of is learn how code works, learn how product develops, learn how they ship product. Because if you don't know that, you cannot effectively help the organization prioritize. You can't come up with a good prioritization framework unless you understand what a threat model is, right? Like I always say, like, if you're fortunate enough to have product security, you should probably have your product security team and your vulnerability management team like switch sides and like send somebody over to product security, send somebody over to vulnerability management, and just see what they deal with on a daily basis. And if you aren't fortunate enough to have that, your vulnerability management team should be embedded with the product organization. Like you should at least once a quarter, once a month, like somebody should spend a sprint being a product manager and seeing how that works. Because otherwise you're just not going to be able to understand uh, the differences in the system so that you can come up with processes at a high level. But that's I also think all vulnerability management people should probably learn how to code. So there is that.
Well, yeah, I think your point is, it's like regardless of what role you're in vulnerability management, like you have to sit down with the people on the other side of the fence,
Absolutely.
and throughout the organization and get alignment with leadership. That's really a general theme. And then question for you, Matt, like what things can VM teams really help with, right? That can make a difference as it relates to vulnerabilities for the development teams.
VM teams have a lot of tooling that could potentially come into play. So take software bill of materials or software composition analysis, right? Those tools can often spot not only missing patches, but also potentially libraries that are out of date. And that could be useful feedback for the dev team that needs to take on some sort of library update to get past a known vulnerability in an open source component. So that's where they can share that knowledge with the dev team. The dev team can use that to take that missing or patch or whatever, get it incorporated into their build and deployment cycle, so they can include that and test with it and make sure that that patch that the vulnerability team wants fixed isn't going to break the resultant product.
Yeah,
It seems like, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, I was gonna say I was gonna say effectively exactly that, right? It's you need to and you need to understand what you need, like what product security needs from you in order to provide that, right? And I've seen some really interesting organizational structures where it's like they'll even have the vulnerability management team work with the folks that are actually out there maintaining container images, like the latest container image builds, right? Because we know that we're building on top of Kubernetes or whatever it is, and they are relying on the security team, not necessarily to be embedded directly with the product team or embedded directly with the engineering organization. They provide them a set of tools that we know that if they use those, that it's going to enable them to have secure by design impacts. And I would say like a good example of this is the U.S. Air Force actually has this platform called Software One, which is effectively taking that exact same concept, and it's basically you can different vendors, different tools, different like individual container image like versions can get onboarded onto this this platform. And the idea is that as long as you're using all of the provided tooling in that suite, that it's going to be set up in a way where it auto updates. It's going to be set up in a way where every time you pull down the latest version, you're going to have the latest, patches and everything like that. So providing the tooling, I think, is a huge missed opportunity in a lot of organizations, but it's also really expensive to set up. So I could understand why you wouldn't necessarily start there. But there's a lot of different ways that VM, I think, can support product security.
Yeah,
So
if I may, sorry,
go
go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're good.
I love the containers thing, Scott. Kind of building on that, when you think about containers as from a traditional IT perspective, right? They're a VM-ish, right? And somebody needs to patch them. Except that with containers, the dev team making the product is basically responsible for the patching. So in that case, vulnerability management needs to go to who's responsible for patching the thing. Well, in that case, it's the dev team.
Yep, that's another one of those big challenges, which is who owns what, which I'm sure you're going to ask about, Patrick.
No, well, I mean, yeah, ultimately, I think I created a diagram with CVEs and who might own them. And, I tried to map that out to like, development, Log4j or like, different people. But the reality in many cases, it's like, there's like 3 or 4 people or teams involved in a single CVE in some cases that you don't think about, right? And it's like, oh, a dev team, like it's not only just the dev team, like someone like a large organization, it might have 20, 50, 100 dev teams that CV could get routed to as well. So I think getting visibility to people, the right people, right, is part of that when you're talking about alignment with other parts of the organization. So Matt, you put together something in regards to 6 key behaviors for secure development. I think that was one of the things in regards to how to help people learn. Do you want to talk through that? You want me to pull that slide up?
Sure, that'd be great. So let me kind of set the stage. A number of years ago, I was working with a team trying to figure out a way to kind of get a sense as to how mature their organization was for secure development practices without having a whole lot of time, because it might be an acquisition, it might be an internal team, it might be a product team, right? And we got to know, like, how bad are things here? And so I devised this way, and I made a presentation at RSA a number of years ago with 5 things, and since then it's kind of grown. And in fact, you could expand it further and make it a dozen things if you want to. But there's some standard behaviors that if you just kind of see where these behaviors are at, is the team doing them, and are they doing them well? You can kind of get a quick assessment of the maturity level. And so I put together 5 that I started with from a friend of mine, Michael Howard of writing secure code fame, and then added dynamic application security testing. And if you think about it, these are the things that kind of start that process of secure development. We have secure development training, right? Are people getting training not in the traditional IT, hey, don't click on the phishing email, but the how to develop secure code aspect. Threat modeling, looking at the design, trying to figure out which ways it could go wrong and what you can do to prevent that from a security perspective. Static application security testing, so looking at the code, using all those really cool tools that tell you accidentally wrote a buffer overflow and maybe you should just fix that. The software composition analysis, looking at the libraries like we've been talking about, or the patching that's missing in that base thing, what needs to be fixed there to close the CVE, to just improve it overall, make sure it's supported, right? Looking at the actual testing of what's deployed with some sort of automated scanner or something to really quickly and routinely try to get that testing feedback from the easily discoverable problems. And then having a software security incident response plan, knowing who gets the call at 3 a.m. when there's some sort of problem that's going around and there's like an O-Day that's in the product and worse yet, in the code that your team wrote that you're directly responsible for. If you do those 6 things, you'll be well on your path to being able to have a process in place to make secure product.
Hey, Scott, what are we missing?
Well, as
Devil's
a
advocate.
make this go up to 12 easy, but I think it's really impressive that he was able to distill it down to just 6, because all these systems, they get really big and raunchy real quick, and pretty nasty, but yeah, I would totally agree. I think I'm interested in the software bill of materials, because obviously you got software, it used to be called software composition analysis, and now we're sort of transitioning into a more, I'll call it a postmodern SCA world. But how do you view the long term of where software bills of materials go in that? Like, does it become a just another like kind of prerequisite? Is it a natural extension of SCA of as we see it today? Like, what do you see as I'm going to ask for a prediction. What do you see as the SBOM future?
I've seen them used interchangeably, and I've seen them not used interchangeably. I sort of make the distinction between what phase of the project are you in. So when I think software composition analysis, I think of all the libraries, the third-party modules that go into the actual built software. So primarily libraries that might be linked in or programmed in or something like that. When I think software bill of materials, I think of the broader perspective of the thing you're still delivering, but it may also include things like the operating system, its patch state, et cetera. So for example, if you're making Internet of Things type, if you're making a device, it often has an embedded operating system. In that case, the SBOM is the entire set of everything that goes on the box. The software composition analysis would just be for the code that you wrote to customize it, those libraries that let you do the cool thing on the device.
I think it's a great distinction. That's the way that I have seen it as well. But I've started to see, them used interchangeably. So maybe we can make our statement here right now. Put our foot down. Don't use them interchangeably.
Be clear as to what you're defining, because otherwise it'll get really confusing. And also, there's other challenges related to that. What is the SBOM for a software product that is just a software package that gets delivered to some customer or client?
It's a great question. I'm sure CISA has some opinions on that.
Yeah, but does it include the operating system?
Yeah, I will say, at least from what we're seeing on the Nucleus side, is it generally does include the operating system, right? Is they want the whole bundle, and they want all the software to run the whole bundle. But again, I think part of that is because SBOM is being really championed by the federal government, right? So they're trying to maneuver it into their uses, and it is interesting, right? Because are you then responsible as let's say you're delivering a product, like an embedded product, right? And that it's gonna run on Windows Server 2016, right? Like, are you responsible for Windows Server 2016 vulnerabilities as you deliver the software to the end customer? So I think it has some interesting ramifications for SOWs and MSAs and whatnot. But I was just curious your thoughts, because I feel like you run into that a lot more than I do.
I did bump into it in some previous roles. The question came down to, hey, what is our span of control? What are we actually responsible for? And if you're delivering a thing, yeah, the operating system you put on there, I don't care if it's a commercial operating system, open source, whatever, you put it in the box, you own the problem delivering that to your customers. If you just made the package that runs on top of a customer's stuff, are you responsible for the operating system beneath it? Maybe. And here's where. If you tell your customer, don't install patches until I validate that they're not going to break the thing, you just took on a certain amount of their patch accountability. But if you just say, hey, it works on this operating system at any patch state, and we'll tell you if if there's going to be a problem, but assume that you can patch and we'll be fine. That's really, it's up to the customer at that point. You're just providing that layer, that shim on top.
Hey, so one thing that came up in the comments, Lori talked about end of life planning for the products and sharing that schedule with your customers. And you've worked in an interesting environment when I think you were at GE or maybe somewhere else where it's like you have an MRI device that lives for 30 years. I don't know how long a medical device like that works, but yeah, how should people be thinking about end of life planning for products? And the risks with these devices that might go on working for 30 to multiple decades, 30 years, right?
Every product should have a defined life cycle. And here's why. You need to know how long you need to support it, because take the medical device, right? Especially in IoT. You've got the different parts. You've got the big magnets. You've got the pumps that do the thing. You've got the computers that run the software that controls the magnets and whatnot. And you've got the software, the operating system inside of that. That's the whole thing that you're putting together and providing. You want that thing to keep running. Well, the magnets are good for a while. The pumps need to be periodically recharged. The computers might need to be replaced every once in a while. But the software on it, the bits, especially at some of those parts you don't control, like the operating system, they get old really quick, right? If you think about it, life cycle, the life cycle of patches or of operating systems is about a month now. So you've got to make sure that as long as you want to say that we still support that product and will guarantee that the magnets work properly, you need to make sure you have a plan in place to support and keep that thing, even all the way down to the bits that are aging fast. If you don't do that, or you're not prepared to do that, then you need to be really upfront with people and say, there you go, have it, good luck with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because, we're in this world where we're probably about split 50-50 now, where there's equal parts like on-premise traditional software, from the olden days to like the SaaS service model, right? And so like, for example, like I was at the airport yesterday and I saw one of those like boarding scanner things, right? Like it's like a new fancy looking machine, all this stuff, literally still running Windows XP on it. And I took a picture and I posted it. Patrick's has seen it. But so it's like you have that just as much as you have all these SaaS services that companies are relying on now, right? Like everything from, even just like cloud services, right? Like the transition from Active Directory on premise to Active Directory in the cloud. Like you have this interesting hybrid split. And what's happening is you have this interesting dynamic of organization and customer has been responsible for patching a thing, right? And like running an end of life piece of software, like outside of the terms of use. And then now you have this equally like vendors that are responsible for end of lifing software. And a lot of these SaaS providers, like it's their main business, right? It's where all the revenue comes from. And so they're building on top of it. And so like, what does end of life look like in that scenario? It's kind of like that old philosophical adage, right? If you have the ship and you replace every plank one plank at a time, is it the same ship, right? And so I think this is going to be an interesting conversation as we develop even further over the next decade. I don't know, Patrick, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answer, I think it loosely did. I think the reality is like a lot of these. I think the question back about how many developers expect their software to be used for 30 years, or the products even, is a real reality. So I think it somewhat does, but I think it's challenging because like, especially when there's hardware involved that's non-security or non-IT related. And those might be just as bad, but like when you're not even doing that stuff and you're building hardware products, I think the reality on the software development side is like this stuff is quite a bit of an afterthought, right? In relation to the process, so it's a big change.
There's a
Yeah.
question that I think we should answer, which is around let me hold on, pull it up. It's from Joel Underwood about, is it possible to move away from needing a quote unquote VM team? I think this is a fascinating topic, and I've had this debate numerous times with various folks in the industry. But Matt, how do you feel? Do you think that we could move away from a VM team being required for product security?
You need to have your team have good visibility into the SCA and SBOM. At that point, at least for product, you could potentially move away from it, especially in more of a SaaS kind of a, go straight from coding to deployment kind of a fashion. More the traditional enterprise IT, where there's folks who build the software or say, I want to use this application, and the different set of folks is responsible for running the servers. Maybe not, but those days are certainly going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because my opinion on this is, and I do preface this with this is an opinion. My opinion on this particular one is that ultimately what is vulnerability management, right? And when I think about it and you dissect it, you're like, okay, well, VM really is an audit function in a lot of ways, right? You're auditing that policies that you have, which is like, hey, we want to patch things within a certain amount of time, are done. We want to audit our code. We want to audit our processes, and we want to make sure that we're reducing risk, right? So a risk reduction through visibility and through auditing. And so the question is, can you replace that type of function inside of a product development lifecycle? And you could theoretically eliminate some of the tactical operational things, but the question is ownership, right? Who then is going to be responsible ultimately for that vulnerability getting fixed? And I've worked with a lot of product owners. I do not know a lot of product owners that willingly say, yes, I also want, on top of my, tech debt considerations, on top of my revenue considerations, on top of my competitive considerations, I also want to own and be responsible for the vulnerabilities and the security of that particular product. I think most of them prefer to have somebody come in and just advise them and say, hey, you got to do these ones because they're really bad. These ones are normal. Like, when you come up with an aligned process where they can say, okay, well, the security guy is handling, or the security team is handling security, and they're helping me, as opposed to product owning it, because ultimately somebody has to own it, and I don't get the sense that product loves owning security at the moment, right? That could change, but that's been my experience so far.
From one of the things I've seen is that product isn't usually rated on did you patch, they're rated on did you ship. Did you deliver the new functionality, the whatever, the revenue like you described? If we had some sort of metric that included a level of measurement of tech debt or a level of measurement of known security badness, if you will, then potentially that could be something that gets factored in. I just haven't really seen a whole lot of teams doing that. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying from my personal experience, I've never seen a team has a security jail kind of a number where if they get over a certain amount of aggregate problem, they have to go fix things.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either. So that means it obviously doesn't exist, right, Matt? I mean, we've got full visibility.
Oh,
I do.
they're hoping they do. But anyway,
I do think, like, when you get into companies that are SaaS security based, like, I think there tends to be more of a culture of knocking that stuff out proactively, which is better. Not at all of them. I mean, you also have SolarWinds, but like for every good one, we could probably point out 19 bad, right? So I think that's a real reality. Two things. So first, you brought up a second ago secure by design. I think that was Scott. And secure by design, I think is being championed mostly we see by CISA and Chris Hughes. No, a lot of people. But I'm curious from your perspective, Matt. We talked before. You had a pretty interesting perspective on what this means. Could you kind of give us an overview of like what your perspective is on what secure design means?
sure. And I'm kind of old school, and I look at it from a secure by design, secure by default, secure in deployment, and communications, which was, I think, something Microsoft postulated over a decade ago. And secure by design means that for me, out the door, they've done all of that due diligence to try to minimize the amount of risk that while still providing that desired and specified functionality.
Sweet. I think like keeping it super simple and easy, and just so everyone knows, like you can also go to CISA's website and check out their secure by design stuff. I think they have a new document out today.
Big
which
fan
is
of the
interesting.
CISA stuff.
I think the other thing on my mind, like I'm just I pay attention to all the happenings in the world, and like regulations are pushing to move faster, quicker. I thought it was interesting, and I think like some of the challenges, the regulations are probably actually more written for IT security, but the way in which they're written to make them just as applicable from my perspective to product security. And so I think like that's another interesting angle from my perspective is like, yeah, we might have to see product teams prioritize the security stuff a lot more than they historically have, driven by some of the regulations themselves, as well. I don't know if you have opinions on that, either of you. Scott's laughing.
I just love that they're trying to like make things happen, and then they use the vaguest language possible for all this stuff. Where it's like I use that example. Like one of the most recent ones that came out was like I think even Australia, Essential 8 like added language around like, hey, you need to patch critical vulnerabilities within 48 hours, and it's like, okay, do they define anywhere what critical means, or do they define anywhere what severity means, and like what does it mean to them? Like, so there's no guidance on really like what they want. They say critical severity. It's like, okay, well, if I have 3 different scanning tools, they might rate the same CVE or the same vulnerability as 3 different severities. Which one do I believe? And so they're trying to be consistent, but they lead to extra inconsistency, is from what I'm seeing. Like there's just a lot of confusion going on at the moment, with all these pushes towards this stuff. But that's just what I see.
One of the things I saw when I was working with medical stuff was we actually talked to folks in some of the regulatory bodies. And if you think about the spirit of what they're getting at, I think it starts to make a little more sense as to where they're going, right? They want to make sure that the thing is getting patched so that the underlying security problems of some component don't become the thing that breaks the device or makes it risky to someone or causes any sort of other problem. They want to make sure that that part of the process happens. The verbiage they have around that might be vague and confusing. In fact, Scott, when you mentioned the timeline of 48 hours, I'm like, okay, when do you start the clock, right? I mean, there's different things that go into how they would propose to measure it. But it's really about making sure that the thing gets done. And sometimes I've seen folks in products get tripped up on well, they said we have to do 48 hours. I'm like, well, really, what does that mean? Are you able to get close to that? Let's break it down and think about the spirit of what's trying to come across, because that'll go over really much better when you're trying to talk to a regulator about why you can't or can't meet it.
Yeah, and ultimately, I 100% agree with that, because I think the government and regulators are starting to see effectively what I think the true problem here, right, and the true challenge that we have in product security and vulnerability management, for that matter, but more exacerbated in product security, is actually just misalignment between what the business wants and what the security team wants. Like ultimately, product teams are going to make decisions based on how they're incentivized and how the business from the top down have decided that they should prioritize, right? If leadership is not fully bought into secure by design, doesn't matter how hard you try, you could spend oodles of money and never become secure, because you need to implement at the highest level, like consistent decision making that everybody understands. And I would say that's the problem the regulators are trying to solve. And I think that they probably have the best chance of solving that through, I mean, that's really how compliance drives outputs and action. So I do think that it's good. I came across a little probably gritty earlier, but I do think it's good that they're regulating this stuff, because it's the only encouragement that is going to overrule incentive structure of traditional, like, hey, like, do we want to ship the thing and be able to talk about it and be competition, or do we want to be more secure and slow down? And so I think that is it's a good initiative that the regulators are taking. It's just a matter of, I think, obviously implementation, we can probably pick at all day. So
Yeah, I think the other piece is, it's like there's a difference between like a net scaler that's pervasive around the world being exploited externally and like a code library. Well, and not even code library, but it's like code you develop being vulnerable, right? At a critical level. So I think there's good intention with these regulations. I agree with you, but I do think the vagueness makes it rather challenging or difficult as to what they're recommending to take action on. But yeah, ultimately, it's like I think orgs need to get better at defining themselves what is important and what their priorities are, and doing it in a defensible way. And that's where vulnerability threat intelligence and due diligence process can help. So, hey, the last thing, Matt, I think you mentioned, interest in talking about if there's one thing people do. And of course, I want you to say go buy Nucleus and a vuln management tool, but that's not actually what we're going to talk about. I'm joking. And so, I'd love to have you walk us through what your recommendation is, and how people can approach, what the one thing you suggest they do is.
Sure. So I'll get to that, and we can actually I can describe how a path it gets to the potential niche that or aspect, if you will, that nuclear security might actually potentially be able to fill here. So I'm very passionate about threat modeling for a variety of reasons, but I think if there's one thing you do, it's threat model, because it unlocks all that other stuff, as well as has some really practical benefits. So if you think about it, I've seen teams over the years who, when you ask them how it's put together, you ask one question of this developer and you ask the same question of that developer, they're not going to tell you the same thing. So by threat modeling, usually there's some sort of data flow diagram or system diagram. You get the team in the same room to start to threat model it, and they start to agree or disagree or clarify what is actually built, right? So you end up with a deliverable of, hey, this is what we think we put together. It also reinforces any of that secure development, or even some of the just security awareness training that may have been done over time that the organization has already invested in. You're going to get this set of potential security failure modes, which become security test cases that you can automate, or you could potentially build into a tool, program into some sort of scanning tool that would then look for those problems to see if they ever pop back up again after they've been mitigated. And so then you can say, well, for what we know is left, these are the things that we know are there, and we're going to have to eventually address, or at least agree that we didn't address them. But I think the most important thing is that it actually helps you identify the security talent that you already have in the organization. Those are the folks that maybe have a little bit of security knowledge, or a little bit of security experience, or just a passion or an interest in it. And they're going to be the ones who are going to like really dive into working on the threat model. They're also going to be the ones who then become like potential candidates for your product security team when you need to expand. They also might be the people who might say, hey, gosh, we're not doing anything. I heard about this product, Nucleus Security, that could potentially fit this niche. Why aren't we using this in our pipeline?
It's great.
Yeah.
I think it ties back a lot to getting buy-in and alignment across the organization on what things need to be done.
It 100% does. Alignment is key, and threat modeling is a great exercise for that. I'm a big fan of threat modeling also. And it gets really fun when you start threat modeling up at higher and higher levels, right? So it's like, okay, you've got this product, and then you go up and you can do the suite of products, and then you can do threat models at the higher levels. And I think, to Matt's point, like, every developer, most engineers I've ever worked with, they want secure code too, right? Because like they don't just want a lot of them are competitive and they want the best code, right? And so if you can start encouraging them that, like, hey, actually the best code is secure code, right? Like secure, fast, like all of a sudden it gives they want that, right? They want that as much as they want to be able to make sure the feature works. It's really enabling them to understand how to think about it. And if you include them in that threat modeling process to get a shared understanding, where everybody understands like what's going on and what you want, I mean, it's a culture shift that needs to happen, and it's pretty easy to make that happen once you start bringing engineering into the fold, right? It's like, how do we share as much information as possible? Like, we can't expect developers to own security and then not share information with them about the security, right? Like, we have to get them in the vulnerability data, the threat modeling data, the risk data. All that needs to be in the hands of developers so that they can take action on their own. Because more often than not, they'll do the right thing if you present the right options for them,
Some of the reality too, as it relates to the developer side, is they just don't have visibility into things like threat that maybe the more the traditional teams do as well. So I do tend to agree, like a lot of awareness training, education, alignment needs to happen to solve for this. and get to a better place and more effectively to secure by design. So any before we wrap up, any last thoughts? We have a few minutes here, and we can look through if anybody has any additional questions as well. But anything you guys want to add as far as advice, last thoughts in regards to product security and in alignment with vulnerability management?
One of the things that I've seen challenge related to the two teams interacting is making sure they're at least speaking with the same gradation scale. So, make sure that the verbiage you use to describe a product security problem is the same scale as what you might use to describe a vulnerability management thing like a patch. So could be you're using CVSS, could be you're just using the same bands and names for those, but at least make sure that you're speaking all to the same banding, so that when you need to go to somebody who controls both the dev team and the ops team, or that whole DevOps team that does everything all at once, you can help them understand that no, this code flaw is as bad as this critical patch, or vice versa.
That's great advice. I mean, if you're using the same terminology, then it's going to be easier to action on, for sure. So cool. Anything from you, Scott, from the woods?
Yeah, I think the it doesn't feel that way right now in the in the woods, but one thing that I think we need to all just acknowledge is, like, this is a really hard set of problems, right? Like, it's not easy what we do, and it's not easy what we're asking people to do, right? And so it's kind of like, I don't know if you to give you a sense of where I've been with post COVID, but I don't know if anybody's ever tried to diet, right? Like it's like everybody wants, like, the diet that's going to be like the easy diet that's going to just drop a bunch of weight. But when the reality is that you're just going to have to, like, you're going to be hungry sometimes. Like, that's a reality that we acknowledge and, like, understand that happens. It's like we have to acknowledge that it's going to be a challenge, right? Like, no matter what it is, and it's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require a lot of grit, and it's going to require to oftentimes disagree with leadership, right? Because leadership and business leaders are not security people. They don't, quite frankly, they don't care about security to the level that we do. They care about it in the same sense of, like, hey, what's the minimum that we can do to make sure that our business is going to be successful, right? Like so we have to be able to translate it to their terms. We have to be able to translate it down to the developer level and engineers. And it's a really challenging thing. And so getting alignment is huge. Getting normalized systems in place, like Matt suggested, around, like, standardized bandings on how we approach things, treating it as a risk problem and not an individual engineering problem and an individual vulnerability management problem, are all things that we have to do. But I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's going to be super, super easy. But the good news is that we have job security because of it, I guess. So that's the silver cloud. But I will say we've seen a lot of improvement over the last 5 years, let's say, in this, through a lot of the tooling that's now available, which will provide a lot more security by default, which is going to go a long way, right? We have to just stop some of the bleeding of getting crap out there into the wild.
Yeah, I loved my my conversation a few months back with Alexander Yampolsky, the CEO of Security Scorecard. He was actually a CISO before starting the company, and he mentioned one of the investors saying, like, I don't think you're doing a good enough job. And he's like, why? And he's like, nobody's complaining. And it's not that we want insecurity people to complain, right? But, like, in some regards, like, you kind of got to push people in relation to security to get focused on the right things and take care of them. And it is kind of an inconvenience. I mean, it's a real reality where, yeah, people want to be writing features that are useful or exciting, when in reality, like, yeah, security still needs to get done.
Yeah.
And it's becoming a bigger priority than ever. So,
And they have
well,
to trust.
cool.
The only way they're going to do it is if they trust you. There we go. I couldn't leave on, like, I couldn't have the last word be in the wild. So trust. There you go.
It's all about
Yeah.
trust.
So, hey, Matt, thanks so much for joining us today. Scott, thanks for joining from the woods. Next month, we're going to talk about another one of my favorite topics, how to operationalize vulnerability threat intelligence. And that's an area where I've done a lot more research. As you can probably tell on this discussion, product security isn't as much of my background and strength. But super excited. We have Mandy on with us. December 20th, how to operationalize vulnerability intelligence, Jared Summerow and Caleb Hawk, who we work closely with as well. So I just want to, put out thanks to both of you for joining. It's been a really great conversation. I think interesting as far as how to get buy-in with other teams across the organization, how to build a successful product security program, and some of the steps that you highlighted, which were incredibly helpful as far as actionable things that vulnerability management teams can do to help product security teams. So thanks so much to both of you. I greatly appreciate the time today. It's been fun.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick.
Sweet. Take care.
See you, everybody.